Hello and welcome to Art 17 again. We're still in week 3 and we're going to talk about assignment 6, crumpled paper. Forget the bag part, I'll get rid of that later. Crumpled paper we're going to do. I mean, you could do a bag, but it ends up being a little bit more bulky and not as uh, easily to get the point across with all the contours and the crevices and whatnot you can get out of paper. Plus the bag, maybe a brown paper bag, is going to be a little less accurate on shading than using the white because it does have a tone of its own. So I mean, you could do it, you try it, but I'll show you some examples and then you determine. But I would say just some printing paper or sketch paper or something like that that doesn't have just no holes in the side and no lines on it. You don't have to draw those. It's just crumpled paper. So the idea, these are student drawings, by the way, from past semesters. And so basically you're going to crumple the paper up in your hand into a ball and then kind of pull it out a little so it's not too tight. Depending on how tightly you crumpled it, when you set it on the table, you want to pull it out slightly, but not all the way. So, it's still in a ball form in most cases here, but you can see a lot of dark areas and light areas and in between areas. So, you're going to start mapping this thing out once it's on the table with a single light source, cast shadow from a window or a lamp. If it's a window, try to make sure you're sort of by that window rather than a bunch of windows, so that it does have one side that's lit up and one side that really isn't. And there's the darks and lights that you can put in all that contrast that creates the shape of what you're drawing. Without the contrast, without the tones, it's flat and doesn't have a three-dimensional appearance. And that's what your goal is. That's what you want. More 3D than not. Okay, so this is a good one. Lots of lights and darks. That's probably the darkest area right there. And maybe the lightest area here where it's really catching some light. But all this in here are midtones. And from the darkest to the light, they work their way one stage, one level to the next. Here there are gradation, a very gradual transition between the darker and the lighter tones right in here. And on many other areas. Some go right directly to the other tone because it was folded there, crumpled there, and that's fine. But you'll see that most of this does not have lines. There's not lines like border lines to everything. Line here, line here, line here. If you look at what you're drawing from, which is going to be a model that you set up of crumpled paper, you'll see there's no lines drawn on it. It's just that the shading ends one place and other shading begins, and that makes a perceived edge. Okay. Maybe you can highlight some areas like this. That might work, but mostly there's no lines in between all the shading areas, or to show the edge of where the crumpled paper is. Even on the outside of this, they're using the cast shadow here and more shading around the image. It's not white on a table. Oh no, that isn't crumpled paper. What's going on here? All right. Here's another example. Lots of highlights in this one. Wherever the lightest areas were on the paper from the light source. I think the artist here erased out little places with a thin eraser. You can buy erasers that come out of a pencil, like an injector pencil. It's a little eraser at the end that's kind of sharp, and you can sharpen it by cutting it. But you can get really sharp eraser lines that way. So here again, one light source, cast shadow on one side of the table from the image, lights and darks, maybe 7 different levels of tones. Oh no, I gotta quit doing that. What it does is it dips into my big storage unit of images. Okay, here's another one, kind of scratchy looking stuff, but it does work. It's a certain style to shade like that. What it tells me though is that there's scratchy areas here, which probably aren't accurate because this is a smooth surface all around this thing, pretty smooth, but it does give it some character. Actually gives it some movement or whatever. You know, it's still a strong drawing. We can tell it's crumpled paper. And cast shadow, which is very nicely done with the little, you know, this is very artistic as opposed to photographic, which is artistic in a way, of course. Okay, yeah, that's art. But when you're doing something so perfect, it tends to not look creative in a sense or have a style of its own. It's just photographic image, which is perfect. And anyone that could do work that well will do that. And they don't have their own style. I'm looking for, maybe you have your own style, but make it strong. Make it strong in the sense that you have very many levels of tone in what you're drawing, and that it's interesting and it's accurate to what your subject matter was. That's what you're really looking for. But these are the dark and the lightest areas and all the in-between areas. Here they do rely on some lines, but that's the style of the drawing, which, you know, it's more an impression as opposed to being realistic. But, you know, I'll allow that if it looks really, really good. If it's really super amateur and it's just lines with very little shading, the shading's really scratchy and not working. Oops, I did it again. Why do I do that? So last image, somebody else did this one. Yeah, there are some areas where they relied on the line there, but most of it isn't. Okay, and this is a really nice transition area in here from darker into the lighter, back into the darker, back into the darker here, but light here, and it meets up with this light tone here, 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 back and forth. But it's telling you the shape of this thing. It dips in here and here and pooches out here, kind of pooches out here, dips in here. This is all being told to the viewer as they're viewing it with their eyes. They're not feeling this thing, they're not touching it. So to touch it with your eyes, you need to have all these darks and lights in contrast showing you where the light is hitting on it. And that's, your mind picks it up. Oh, cast shadow. That means it's on a table and there's a shadow there. That light source is coming from this area over here. And then because this is dark on this side and that's light on that side, this is behind the light source, but it pooches out and kind of towers up right there. And this going really deep into a crevice here because it's really dark. Your mind picks all that up. Okay, so try the crumpled paper. I think in all of these, there was some sort of a background shaded in, or at least a really good cast shadow on the table. In any case, I think this is less strong than this one, or this one has a lot of background. Shading. Get rid of that white paper. This is okay because it has a lot of contrast. Okay, I'll admit that. But I think it actually would have been stronger if there was just a little bit of a tone back here. It tends to lift the image off the paper when you do that. Whenever there's white back there, it's sort of just like laying there, in my opinion, anyway. Okay, so now let's talk about the homework, which is a fun one. It's just kind of an odd experiment, but it's like using your imagination and learning to use imagination. So the first drawing, 2 drawings, they can be on the same page. 2 drawings, they can be on the same page. Object from life. So you're going to put an object out, whatever it is, and draw it. And after looking at that for a long time and drawing it, take that same object in your mind and a space of paper and draw it with your eyes closed, totally closed. Don't open them and peek. Just wherever you're starting, look at the image in your mind without opening your eyes. In that darkness, look at the image you remember drawing, and then just draw it out as best you can. You can lift the pencil if you want, back and forth, shade, or just draw lines, but try to draw exactly what you were looking at without looking at it at all. And don't look at the drawing. You don't open your eyes. Draw as much of it as possible. I'm going to know the difference. So don't try to cheat it, all right? Just don't look at it, have your eyes closed, look at the image in your mind about it, and then draw that out. And not important how long it takes you, but try to get all of that content out onto the paper within that time zone that you are allowing yourself. And that's the project for the week 3 homework. All right, 2 drawings. All right, so we're going to talk with you next week now, which is going to be entering the 4th week, and it's going to get a little more involved. So any of these could become your final. The final is at the end of the semester, which is going to be your best work, matted and framed, unless it's a painting, and we'll talk about that, ways to do that. There's a midterm I'm going to talk about in week 6, probably start talking about it, and we'll get to that later. All right.